This week on Arizona Illustrated, the Santa Cruz runs again.
This is a grand experiment. We actually don't know for sure how far the water will flow.
A portrait of poetry.
Poetry exists in its world. It is an art form amongst other art forms where presence is required.
Chris Rush and the Light Years.
I was very much in Tucson, in the desert. It was all a very light-driven existence.
And a passion for plants.
I like anything that's weird. I understand why they look that way. They're adapted to their environment.
Welcome to Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. As the monsoon arrives here in southern Arizona, we are reminded of the power of water, the new life that it brings, and what a precious resource it really is. Earlier this month, in celebration of rain and water, a stretch of riverbed in the heart of Tucson that's been dry since the 40s was reborn. This is the Santa Cruz.
So we're standing here at the Mission Garden. It's a ethnobotanical garden where we're trying to represent very much what Tucson used to be 150 years ago. People would have been growing wheat, corn, beans, fruit trees, they would have been growing vegetables and all kinds of plants that would have been sustaining the community. All, of course, related to the amount of water that was present in the Santa Cruz River.
The Santa Cruz River has always been a key part of why Tucson has had civilization here for thousands of years. And even though it doesn't look like it today, it used to be a perennially flowing river.
This was a thriving, flourishing river with cottonwoods and willows and surface water flowing all year long. As we move through history, population growth, the Spanish, the European influence in the region.
People would actually divert water out of the river in order to grow crops or do other things. And that really started changing how the river behaved into the early 1900s.
And later on, as air conditioning came into this area, the city exploded.
People discovered how to pump from the groundwater beneath the river in order to keep building the community.
There's a lot of factors that led to the river drying up, but groundwater pumping is a big one. That changed what was living along the river. You know, the Gila top minnow disappeared, as well as many other native fish.
Visionaries have often thought about, okay, wouldn't it be great if we could have the Santa Cruz River flow again? But it wasn't until about 2016 that Tucson Water really took a look at, okay, is now the time? Is there an opportunity here? And do we have the resources in place that it could make sense? And it really did. It lined up really nicely as something that would be good for the community, but it also fit in with how we approach management of our water supplies for the future. And so it's been about a 3-year conversation from idea to when we're actually going to dedicate the flow.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you all to this dedication ceremony for the Santa Cruz River. This is a project that's been many years in the making, and we're finally here today.
This is a grand experiment. We actually don't know for sure how far the water will flow. We have a limited pipe diameter and limited amount of water we can put in. So we're going to use that, and it'll flow maybe 1 mile, maybe 2 miles. We'll find out over time. A lot of people might wonder about, okay, how are ratepayer dollars being used to do this? And the total cost of this project is well under $1 million. To be able to recharge this amount of water in a constructed facility would be at least 3 to 6 times as expensive as that. When we deliver water into the river channel, most of it actually soaks in to the groundwater beneath. And when you do that over time, it actually can start to rebuild the groundwater underneath it.
Adding any kind of water regularly to the river is going to increase diversity and probably support more plants like willows and other vegetation that need more access to water, aquatic wildlife, insects that a lot of them start their life in the river and they're a good food source for fish and birds.
It's a very high quality of reclaimed water. It's not drinking water, but incidental contact with that water is perfectly appropriate. This is the same water that we use on our golf courses, that we use in our parks and school grounds, and it's actually the same quality of water that already flows in the Santa Cruz River much further north.
The stretch of the river from Sweetwater Wetlands area north to Marana, I believe we've been releasing water into the river since the 70s, so we've been doing it for a long time, but what's really changed is the quality of the water. I don't think there was any seeding of vegetation, it just will come on its own. So, give it water and it will come.
See, a few people have asked, how would the return of the flow affect the Mission Garden or would complement somehow the Mission Garden? Wildlife and the biodiversity, whether we're talking bats, insects, and birds, and possibly reptiles, will be connected in a bridge between the A Mountain, Tumamak Hill area, the Mission Garden oasis, and the permanent flow, even if it's small, will definitely increase the biodiversity in the entire area.
Unless you live in the desert, you just don't appreciate rain and rivers the way Tucsonans do. And releasing the water into the Santa Cruz today on El Dia de San Juan, when Tucsonans are good and ready for the monsoon to start, is especially appropriate. Only Tucsonans could understand why, on one of the hottest days of the year, we go outside of our own free will, celebrate our city, and fervently hope for rain.
It is a very important symbolic gesture, I would say. Personally, I can compare to what we're doing here at the Mission Garden. There's no way we can bring everything back to the way things used to be, when Tucson was a little town, but yet it brings us the concept of why we're here. Understanding the origins of Tucson makes us understand this region. It makes us conserve, it makes us appreciate what we have. When you see the water flowing in the Santa Cruz and you can go and touch it, and you can go and put your feet in the water, you are touching history.
Really, we focus so much on what we've lost along the river, and our river is still there. It's very much alive. It's probably really different from what it used to be in the past, but it's still part of our heritage. It's the reason we can call Tucson home.
In this story, poetry and photography are joined. The Center for Creative Photography celebrates the bicentennial of Walt Whitman's birthday with a portraiture project by photographer B.A. Van Sise, expressing his lifelong love of poetry.
It was not difficult to convince 86 poets to come on crazy adventures with a total and exaggeratedly dressed stranger into the woods and into the ocean, into this thing and that thing, because it's about experience and it's about presence.
B.A. is a very talented photographer, and the fact that he set upon this with such diligence. The National Portrait Gallery has taken one of these editions, but you're taken in.
I'm a photographer. We live in another medium that people are very fond of saying is becoming less and less relevant and is boring and is less important, and anyone can do it. Poetry exists in its world in the same way that photography exists in its own. It is an art form amongst other art forms where presence is required. you want to go and photograph Richard Sykin in the desert in New Mexico, you need Richard Sykin to come to the desert in Mexico and actually hold the newspaper on fire and be present with you. If you are a poet, you also need to be present in a way that other writers don't.
These photographs have movement and texture. Some of them are wild. We've taken the didactic material next to the photograph, and it's not just tombstone information. It's a connection to the photograph. So you have the poem and the photograph and the story and the poet, and you're looking at the image, and it's a perfect melding of the two mediums.
I love the connection between the art forms. It's especially exciting here at the U of A, especially exciting because of the Center for Creative Photography, because of the Poetry Center. We have these two really prominent and exciting cultural institutions. The fundamental building block of a poem is the image. And what I love about the image and what I love about what poetry teaches us about the image and also what photography teaches us about it is that it's both invested deeply in stillness and also in movement, and there's great tension between those two things. It's a moment that's trapped in time, and it's a moment that is somewhat outside of time at the same time.
I started as a hobbyist when I was in high school, in a high school photography club, like everybody else, I think. I got my first job working as a photographer for the then fledgling New York Sun. It is now defunct, that's not my fault. But I started professionally when I was 18, which was a while ago. In 2015, I think, I got pretty sick and had to have a bunch of surgeries. And I had a very, very long recovery period. It was terrible, it was psychologically terrible, it was physically terrible, I was in a lot of pain. And I was sitting around saying, I need something to do, I need a project. And I had always been a poetry lover. When I was in high school, I actually used to not sneak in, but I'd go in early in the day and I would write out poems on the blackboard in the English classrooms. And I basically inflict poetry on the various totally uncaring high school masses of Long Island. There's a difference between when you're doing stuff sort of as a receptive journalist versus when you're trying to create something that's more of an artistic endeavor.
In an effort to get people to look into each other's eyes more, and also to appease the mutes, the government has decided to allot each person exactly 167 words per day.
I just always been a poetry lover, and I realized, well, you know, after 15 years of journalism, I've gotten good at tracking people down. It might be interesting to do some portraits of poets and just see kind of how that goes. There's this sort of classical idea of this guy wearing a tweed jacket with pockets, and he's white and he's male, and he's sitting and doing this in front of a row of books. I did not want to do that. The very first one I did, I put Gregory Pardlow in a boat in the middle of a body of water, make it look like something different, and make them sort of reflective of the work. It became immediately obvious to me that I wanted to do something that would illuminate the work and the people that are so often overlooked. And so it just kind of just got built out from there. And this word got out to the point where I would start reaching out to folks and I'd give them whatever my crazy idea was, and they'd say, oh, but so-and-so's idea was a little crazier, we could do better.
When we think about who writes poems or who poems are available to, where do they come from? How do they come into the world? And this is a show that explores that in a really profound way. And what you see when you spend a lot of time looking at it is that poets are very much like the rest of us.
We really did, in fact, put a horse into a restaurant for Joy Harjo's photograph. The horse was a champion. The only person actually in danger was poor Brandon Constantine over on the wall over there. We actually did get a Van de Graaff generator, and we actually did electrocute him. And me, and my superintendent, who is a 55-year-old man from Albania, who's a very tough guy. And he walked in, and he's used to my shenanigans for 10 years, but he walks in and he sees this whole scene where there's this man he's never seen, and 3 people, and a Van de Graaff generator shooting lightning over the room. And he walks in and goes, oh, and he starts purposely shocking himself, just for the thrill of it. Man should have been a poet. There's a number of images that exist there that are very closely tied to the way that I have experienced my own life, and were chosen for that. There are a few images that are here on the wall where I picked it because it reminded me of an old love. There were certainly people who were here where it was very meaningful for me to meet them. There are quite a lot of poets here whose work I don't enjoy. Once I started getting into it, I decided really the crux of it was that I wanted it to be a census there is this renaissance in poetry right now. There's a lot going on. We're in a very strange cultural moment right now where the what I consider to be important values of poetry and the idea of expression of empathy and that kind of thing are very, very important.
This show feels like a giant welcome mat to me in some ways. It's beautiful, it's evocative, it's wild, but it also is a way in. And I hope people will see it that way when they come experience it.
Oftentimes I think people come into galleries and they may be put off or they don't understand the subject matter. And this is a real effort on our part to not only collaborate with our colleagues on campus, but invite the public in to be curious.
There is sort of the history and the institution of this place. The two exhibitions that were up before me were Richard Avedon and Ansel Adams. That is a meaningful thing. I can't begin to express how deeply, in the literal sense of the word it is, how humbling it is.
Award-winning Tucson artist and designer Chris Rush has released his new memoir, The Light Years. It is a tender and sometimes harrowing coming-of-age journey woven together with youthful experimentation, drugs, sexuality, and adventure.
I was a kid incredibly in love with my life, in love with nature, in love with my sister, in love with God. There was plenty to love. I mean, I was a total bouncing love bunny. I also had a lot of things go wrong. It never occurred to me to be defeated. I was a kid.
Okay, that's a good one. Who am I? My name is Chris Rush. You want that kind of answer? I've been a painter here for decades, and about 10 years ago, I realized that somehow I was writing a book. I bounced back and forth between here and New Jersey. I spent a long period of time as a backpacker in the Catalinas, and that was my code word for homeless. I survived by selling weed. I shopped at the food co-op. I was a skinny vegetarian. But up in the mountains, something happened. I thought I was Jesus in the desert. I was fasting. I was trying to figure out the old questions. This is one of my favorite narc photographs. This is a US agent who has busted a cactus. It's a peyote cactus and it needed to be taken in. And the narcs always photographed pot with guns. Even though there usually were no guns involved, they had to make sure we understood the dangers. When I look at these photos I've collected, I can say it really did look like that. This is exactly what was happening. And I look back on the picture and say, yeah, we really were weird and happy, strange. I wrote this book, or I started the book, saying to myself, well, someone else has written this book. It's obvious. I wasn't alone during those wild years. I mean, someone else certainly has gotten to it before me. And I realized that no one did. There's a lot of reasons for that. You know, being a queer kid from New Jersey, born in 1956, who really liked drugs, your survival chances are a little shaky. You know, my father was wearing flowered ties and drinking J&B, you know. He didn't want to miss out. He was still young. You know, he's probably in his mid-40s when his children started to freak out. And I think it's all, you know, really interesting. You know, there's a lot you simply can't explain. Why that outfit? I don't know. I don't know at all. Oh, God. When I first came out here was in 1971. I had been on a truly harrowing road trip to get here. By the time I got to Tucson, I had just gotten out of the hospital. I had had some problems hitchhiking. I was a mess. But I got here and I still had a wallet full of money, and I was here to score weed. I was 15. In spite of all the ups and downs of being a drug dealer, trying to fall in and out of love 100 times, I found ultimately that I kept thinking of Tucson. I kept thinking of the light here. I kept thinking of like something I saw here that was truer than anything else I'd ever seen. I was originally thinking of great distance, and I was thinking of UFOs and the cities of the universe. But then I thought, oh, I was very much in Tucson, in the desert. It was all a very light-driven existence. It was incredibly sunny and unreal. And then I also thought, and I was a backpacker, and everything I owned was on my back, and I was traveling very light. I had learned as a painter that the image must transact. It must satisfy. It must have an effect. And, you know, the artist has his bag of tricks, you know. I have bright colors and contrast and shapely forms, and I have subjects I know that intrigue. And as the writer, it was the same thing. I had to write in a colorful, bold fashion because it's what I require to be interested. Once I became a true autonomous adult and moved far away from my family, I did consider my past, but for very different reasons, because I was sickened and enraged. Some of it got into my art, but mostly I annoyed my friends and was really bad company. By the time I started to write, it was a very different relationship because I was not writing out of a sense of anger or revenge. I had no scores to settle. I could see clearly all the things that had happened and was looking at them because they were fascinating and peculiar. And even when my villains came back around, I rather loved them. Two hitchhikers, probably Germany. That was very much, that was me. That's what it looked like. Mom and Dad. I wonder if he took drugs. The hippies really did predict the future. And I was one of the experimental babies who was given LSD at 12. You know, and I was told it was a brain vitamin. Perhaps it was.
You're probably familiar with the saguaro, cholla, and mesquite, but what about Euphorbia abdelkuri, Welwitschia mirabilis, and of course, adenium? These are but a few of the rare plants nurtured by botanist Mark Dimmitt.
How do I describe my property? I don't call it a landscape because a landscape architect would freak out at what they do when they come here. They don't see any sense of design. I put the plant where I think it will grow the best. I'm a plant collector is what I am. There are a lot of people like me who we call ourselves plant freaks. And I like to say that there's no 12-step program to help us out of this addiction. I moved to Tucson in 1979 with a moving van full of plants. Today, my inventory is out of date, but I would estimate that I have about 8,000 to 10,000 plants in pots and probably a similar number in the ground. I call this my berry cage because I grow mostly various kinds of berries in here. I grow only thornless varieties of berries because I'm tired of shedding blood from my fruit. I give the extras to friends. That's I think the best thing I can do with them. I have 3 greenhouse areas for tropical plants that need climate control. Some people like flashy flowering tropicals. I like anything that's weird. I understand why they look that way. They're adapted to their environment. And to me, that enriches my experience of enjoying plants. This is a cactus from the Amazon. This is a hybrid that I really love because it's almost always in flower, so it puts on a great show whenever anybody comes to visit. My primary passion for the last 40 years has been hybridizing adeniums. By the time I figured out what it was, I was just obsessed with it because it had beautiful flowers and it had a beautiful twisted stem and a fat base. It had everything I like in a weird plant. And I'm one of the people who helped to introduce them, to popularize them in this country, and according to my friends in Asia, my first hybrids triggered the interest there too. So I'm kind of the grandfather of adenium horticulture. A lot of people call them desert roses, but I don't like that name, so just remember adenium. It's only 3 syllables, easy to learn. When you make a hybrid, you're making something that does not occur in nature, so you're the first one to see a new life form. So it's a lot of tedious work in between seeing 2 plants you'd like to cross and seeing the results a few years later. Patience and real dedication is necessary to do a collection like this, and very few people want to do that. Most people have other things to do in their lives. And I do too, but plants are number 1. I'm very happy to be out here for days at a time without seeing or talking to another human being. And it's not that I don't have friends. I have a fair number of friends. They're almost all plant-related friends. And we get together and mostly talk about plants and a few other things at times. People think I've sacrificed my life for plants. Yeah, it's true. Basically, I don't do anything else. I need to be surrounded by beauty.
Thank you for joining us here on Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. See you next week.